Record.
Great. Wonderful.
Okay. So
I can't see your face. Can I see your face?
I don't know if I didn't, let me see. I'm in my I'm not very presentable. Let me see if I can but then we can turn off the views because it probably will get a better sound quality if we do that.
Oh, there you are. Hello.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
So, Cara, it's great to have you with us. So I'm ready. Whenever you are, we can start this. I can see part of your installation there. That looks pretty good.
Yes. I'm just, let's see, I'm just trying to figure out how to start the QuickTime too. But this is, I will give you a little tour of our home. Let me see how
we'll do that after the interview because I worry about the time.
The timing, right.
Timing.
Okay.
So let's start with the interview first, and then we'll do the rest after we're done.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So you're in Colorado. What part of Colorado are you in?
Let's see, in a really quite fascinating environment in terms of contradictions. It's Paonia, Colorado, and we're about 4 hours from Denver and Boulder area from the Front Range. We're on the western slope, and it's I can go into some of the details about the contradictions and the fertility
let's start with the interview proper, and then we'll have a conversation. Welcome back to Voices of the Middle East and North Africa, Cara, Alhadeff. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Khalil. It's so sweet. It's been 3 years since we spoke.
Okay, all right, something like that. So let me begin with a quote that you used in your essay, The Spectacle of the Invisible.
Yes.
By Carlos Fuentes. It starts with, quote, "We are men and women of La Mancha." In Spanish, La Mancha means the stain. It is crucial that we understand that that none of us is pure, that each of us is part Christian, part Jew, part Moor, part Caucasian, part Black, part Indian, without having to sacrifice any of our components. You mentioned in your essay this centrality of this Spanish notion of limpieza de sangre. As we know, the French, in their wisdom, always derided their neighbors to the south, the Spaniards, as racial mongrels, full of Jewish and Moorish blood, after 8 centuries of Moorish occupation. Explain to us, if you will, the significance of this term in Spanish, limpieza de sangre, and why 600 years later, this idea of pure blood is such an obsession, in your opinion.
Yes, yeah. So many tendrils. So yeah, thank you for jumping right in there, Khalil. So the idea of pure blood, I explore on various levels in relation to issues of disposability, how ethnic others are seen as waste, for example. The idea of cleanliness and proper, what is socially appropriate. So
this limpieza de sangre, in other words, cleanliness of the blood, meaning
right. Oh yes, I didn't translate that. Yeah.
Means. Yeah.
Yes.
Whatever that means. Yeah.
Clean blood, that there's this illusion of purity, which very quickly slips into an illusion of the illusion of neutrality, right? That there's that purity and neutrality go hand in hand. So anything that is deemed other, again, in terms of waste, disposability, those who have different ways of speaking, different ways of communicating, gesticulating, experiencing sensuality, all of these realms are seen as a form of filth and a form of deviance. And what I'm exploring is how to first witness. Are you able to hear and see me
Yes,
still?
yes, I can hear you very well. Yes.
Okay, great. Just
Keep
some
going.
so the idea that any kind of shift from this illusion of neutrality, this illusion of purity, is subversive to the norm. It's subversive to the taken for granted standard of living, the taken for granted linguistic habits, our habitual obedience to elements in our lives that we assume are it's just the way it is.
Just
It's that
the norm, yeah.
Right.
Your very name, Cara, Judea, Alhadeff, is a rainbow. It's a veritable mosaic of Mediterranean cultures and influences, Latin, Jewish, Arabic, bringing three continents together. This essay that I liked so much is an ode to the richness and desirability of recognizing hybridity, cultural, biological, and otherwise, as an essential part of who not only Sephardic Jews are, but all of us are, whether
Yes,
so-called whites or non-whites.
Exactly.
So tell us more about this idea of hybridity and why that's an important and a positive to you.
So hybridity, very, very much in a playful and risk-taking, creative risk-taking contrast to purity and to purity of blood, where the hybrid is a model and can become a model, like Ladino, the language of my family, a language of multiplicity, of hybridity, can become a model for social justice, for eco-social justice, for human rights defense, because of its ability to be in the both and, because of the capacity for responsibility.
Instead of either or, the both and.
Exactly. So really confronting these nation state colonialist ideologies of divide and conquer, these illusory binaries that pit us against one another, and even against ourselves, and that goes into gender constructs, of course, and economic constructs, where our sense of intuition and our sense of our ability to be fully cognizant and sensually connected in the world is diminished because of these illusory binaries. And then that goes back to the illusion of neutrality and then purity. So these are all very entangled messinesses, and that messiness is the fertility of hybridity that I feel very strongly Ladino, the language of the Sephardim.
Ladino is an interesting. Some people may not even be aware or familiar with the term Ladino. We all know about Yiddish, but Ladino is less well known. Tell us a little bit about that intersection, Ladino. I mean, Cara, I'm not sure whether it comes from the Spanish or the Italian, or Ladino, which is
yes,
definitely.
Yes. So I will be, and I can announce this later, but I will be keynoting for the UCLA 11th Annual Ladino Symposium on Zoom on April 4th. And I'll be exploring these issues of hybridity and nation state ideology in relation to the poetics of Ladino as a strategy for social justice. So Ladino is the language of Sephardic Jews, of Jews who were expelled from Spain. Multiple expulsions, but in particular 1492. And it's a hybrid of Arabic, ancient Spanish, Arabic, Hebrew, sometimes Turkish, sometimes Bulgarian, depending on where the Jews fled to after the various expulsions. So there's a constant coevolution, not an assimilation, but a mingling, a commingling, and a lived convivencia, a lived conviviality of relationship between the Jews and their various host countries, I'll call them hosts, in which there was then a third space that evolved.
Yeah, your name again is a wonderful illustration of that. You have Cara in it, which could be taken as Spanish, Latin in general, Italian, Ladino, Judea, which is about, I'm sure it's a Jewish name. And then Alhadeff, which to me and to my ear sounds Arabic. It means goal in Arabic. I don't know what it means
exactly
in other languages, but so you have all. And when you talk about the Jews who were expelled from Spain, many people may forget that some of those Jews had come from North Africa. It wasn't just
absolutely
the Jews of Europe who had ended up in Spain, but you have
exactly. And that's why a lot of these issues of hybridity and purity of blood are so deeply transgress our monolithic ideas of constructions of race, of whiteness, of what it means to be participating in these norms. I very much identify, and have always, since I was a child, identified more intuitively on a more corporeal realm with Middle Eastern or North African cultures, with Arabs or Muslims, for example, who I've collaborated with over the years, or languages from Middle Eastern and North African and Asian countries, then often with Ashkenazic Eastern European Jews. So there's, again, an elision that is critical when we're looking at 2023 politics and poetics of what it means to collaborate and what it means to be committed to collective action in the midst of our differences, as a unity, but not a uniformity of our differences.
In your essay, again, The Spectacle of the Invisible, you speak of a systematic universalizing and historicizing of Jewish peoples now living in the United States. You say the multiple layers of Jewish identities are lumped together into the anonymous, homogeneous Jew, and then lumped again into the category of quote unquote white. It is this ironic trap that perpetuates anti-Semitism and signifies the spectacle of the invisible. Explain that to us.
So, and not just anti-Semitism, but racisms and ethnophobia, ethnocentrism, xenophobias of all kinds. When we are unable to conceive of the bridging of what we see as contradictory identities, for example, Arab Jew. I also identify as Arab-Jewish or Jewish Arab, which is different from Mizrahi, and that's different from Sephardim. But often these are all just lumped together as the other. In contrast, again, this binary between Ashkenazic or Eastern European and non Eastern European Jews. And it's the complexity there, it's the again, the hybridity that can create a sense of both vulnerability and a consciousness of our quantum relationships. The subtitle, or the initial title of my keynote, is quantum entanglements, and it's these quantum entanglements. So that's a phrase from Einstein, spooky action at a distance, where our microcosms and our macrocosms are intimately interconnected. And being of the Sephardic lineage that I am, and Arab Jewish, both lineage that I am, it demands a sense of complexity that cannot be distilled into these divide and conquer, offense, defense relationships. It requires that we move into a space of collaboration.
Yes, and again, to quote you again in that wonderful essay, you say, quote, passing as white / American / normal is impossible, as Sephardim it is our multicultural histories and hybrid sensibilities that enable many of us to identify with the crypto Jews of the Southwest, with the Ethiopian Jews, with the Palestinians, and the Muslims of Yugoslavia. This, end quote, this to me sounds like a rebuke of not only Zionism, but of all forms of white supremacist colonial enterprises. How do you see reclaiming your identity as Sephardic Jew as antithetical to Israel's claim to represent all Jews, whether they like it or not? Are you trying to decolonize, as you were saying, Jewish identity or even ethnic identity in general?
Yes, decolonizing our minds. So that head-on addressing of white hegemonic institutional normalizing is what propels me to work, for example, in a climate justice framework, where I'm looking at the relationships between non-human ecosystems and ecosystems of ethnic multiplicity. So when Israel was established in 1947, though that the frame of difference suddenly collapsed, or I won't say suddenly, but collapsed into a reduction of who we are and what it means to be different. Because when we're different, that's a lot more difficult to control, obviously. Difference, and as we know, homogeneity and habituated obedience, complicity is how we are controlled, how we participate in various forms of interlocking devastations in our lives, environmental and humanitarian devastations in our lives. So if we look at historical examples of how we have been stripped of our specific identities, of our specific poetries, our specific philosophical commitments, and our healing modalities and our educational modes that are very different from one another, we can see then what has happened. For example, how Sephardic Jews and Mizrahim are conflated in Israel. The Black Jews, you know, there's a complete erasure of history.
Tell us about this distinction that is not obvious to some people between the Mizrahim, who are in Hebrew, I think that means Eastern Jews.
Eastern, right? Yes. So
or Persian Jews versus Sephardim.
Yes. So Sepharad refers to Spain very explicitly, often a longing for home, as Spain is home. And the term Mizrahi, I actually recently learned was, and I'm sure this is controversial, but was constructed in an Ashkenazic context to, again, not address the specific histories of those Jews in not necessarily Arab lands, because often Jews were there for thousands of years before the Arabs, or even Muslim lands, because also Jews had been there for often thousands of years prior to Muslims, but in lands that we don't think of Jews as coming from historically, where there's a phenomenal ignorance around these roots, these incredibly
multiplicity of
yes, yeah
of identities. Even the way that Hebrew is spoken in Israel, I learned years ago from going to this seminar here at UC Berkeley, given by a young scholar. Even the way Hebrew is spoken really sounds German. It sounds so European. It doesn't sound like Hebrew from the Middle East or from North Africa. And
yes.
So the extent
radically different,
to which that diversity, cultural diversity, has been squashed is really quite impressive. Even Yiddish for a long time was basically persona non grata in Israel.
Yes, yeah, it was seen as absolutely a less than. And when with a Mizrahi accent, for example, in Hebrew, that's often seen as a bastardized form of Hebrew, when in fact it's more ancient.
The original, yes.
Yeah. And same with Ladino. To my face, I've had people tell me Ladino is a dead language. What is that? The bastardized form of Spanish that you're speaking? You know, and it's the level of fear that we have these internal others, you know, the stranger within, which is what is so exciting, and which what I do believe in every level, what will help us make profound social change. But that is the very thing that people are so deeply afraid of. It's that internal complexity, that contradiction, which I have found in, for example, many Arabic environments to be reveled in those contradictions and ambiguities, rather than a constant stripping and aphorism and soundbite, you know, immediate gratification. So all of these ideologies directly feed into advanced capitalism, to Western industrial capitalism, and reify our illusion of separation from our natural world again and again.
Yes, Hitler used the scientifically dubious concept of race to essentialize the Jews of Europe, arguing they were one single, or the Jews, period, all Jews as one race, arguing they were a single race regardless of their countries of origin, language, or culture, denying the vast and rich diversity that exists within and reducing them to just one. Unfortunately, Zionism has picked up where the Nazis left off, and others arguing that all Jews are one and only one people, one, and that they all come from Palestine. You say that ethnic, quote, ethnic ambiguity threatens the purity of power, of the power structure.
Yeah, even, for example, a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. That unity was never uniformity. That the idea of working across is not about erasure. It's not about censorship. And even in the book that you interviewed me on a few years ago, Zazu Dreams, between the Scarab and the Dung Beetle, the cautionary fable for the Anthropocene era, even in supposedly neutral Jewish environments where I would present that book, it was seen as there was like an underlying threat, because I was questioning. And the idea of questioning is so central to what it means to be in a hybrid state, where we are embodying a hybrid sensibility, because it's the discomfort, it's the uncertainty, it's the vulnerability, which keeps us sentient and also reaching out, rather than locking down into an assumption of this is my property. And again, that goes into issues of purity, racial hygiene. This is my property. You are not going to contaminate me with your difference, with your questioning, with your instability, you know. And then that goes again into quantum physics and how our identities are very wrapped up in this world of the micro and the macro continually feeding into one another and transforming one another.
And we're seeing that as we speak, and issues not of only of colonialism, but also of immigration.
Yes.
Trying to keep the nation pure, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And right. And that goes back to where I'm living in this peculiar environment of intense anti-immigration, and at the same time intense sense of bioregionalism, where people are working as farmers, as textile producers, as educators in a hyper political context that is addressing difference, but in the supporting ourselves locally. And I know that's getting into another realm, but for me, it's so deeply connected to what it means to be Sephardic and also Arab Jewish.
So tell us about this event that is coming up in Berkeley, that you're going to be part of. Tell us a little bit about that.
Two events. One, the first one is April 4th. It's the Ladino Symposium at UCLA. And I can share a little bit more about that. I'm one of the keynote speakers. There are two of us. And Tabea Alexa Lindhart is the other. And then also Micaela Amato Amato will be presenting her artwork in the context of Ladino histories. Say that again. And my mother, yes, yeah, and collaborator. And then the second is May 30th and May 31st at UC Berkeley's Graduate Theological Union. And I've organized a symposium with Majabin Dalla with the Midrasa program there. It's a Jewish-Muslim dialogue. So on May 30th, I will be in conversation with 3 Muslim scholars. And then the next day will be May 31st. So that was May 30th. May 31st will be an exhibition with Pentea Karini as a visual art. She's a visual artist also. So we'll be exhibiting our work, and that's called I Am Everything is our exhibition title. And again, we'll have a dialogue, much of what we're discussing today in terms of nation state ideology and what it means to inhabit our family's experiences in a historical context, and how that manifests in our artwork, and how that manifests in dialogue, and then political action will be central to those discussions also.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. We really look forward to these events, especially the ones happening here in Berkeley, since we can't be in LA.
Yeah. Yes, and the UCLA one is on Zoom, and the Berkeley one is going to be.
Send me a link to that. I think you did. Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Well, you promised me a little tour of your installation there before we run out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So again, I'd love to just emphasize that that my home, we live in a eco art converted school bus, tiny home. Everything down to the last screw, the wood, the